Peace upon you. It is I again. The capitalists believed that they had solved most of their problems, wars, famine, and diseases, by adopting the capitalistic approach. And to be honest, they did. So why did the economic system collapse? After all, the system did take care of people's basic needs and supplied them with endless products, right? The system did take care of people's basic needs, but it did so with the assumption that the resources on our planet are infinite, that the earth can absorb and handle all of their waste, and that the climate isn't affected by their activities. At a certain point, the economists became aware of the damages that this system is inflicting on their surroundings. But they didn't know what to do. At first, the climate started to show signs of unpredictability. Droughts, severe storms, heat waves, but that wasn't enough to influence people's minds. Minds that were mostly troubled with money and capital. Extensive parts of the world were abandoned because they could no longer support population. Refugees started to flood the world, and certain parts of the globe became dense and overpopulated. And then came the real wake-up call. The 5 hardest years in the history of mankind. The hard years, as we call them today. 5 years with heat waves so bad that 50% of all the human race did not survive. And with it, the economy collapsed. People tried to cope with the immediate problem they faced, survival. For the first time in known history, people experienced a reality in which there was no supportive system around them. Governments all over the world toppled and brought down the economic system with them. People were forced out of the zoo, as Nate Haitley once put it. We'll get to know Nate in a while, but I want to explain the quotation. But we actually have a question. What does zoo mean? You're right, I should have explained. A zoo is a phenomenon that humans created in the capitalistic era. People took animal species of all sorts and concentrated them in one place, so other people could pay money to come and see them. Why did they do that? The simple answer was again, money. And unfortunately, they couldn't release the animals after captivity. Can anyone guess why? Because they became dependent. Most animals, if released from the zoo, wouldn't be able to survive in nature, for they were accustomed to get their food and shelter from the zoo workers. So what did Nate mean by saying people were forced out of the zoo? Think about it. How hard is it for a human who was dependent on a system all his life to suddenly make it on his own? That was like asking the animal who was fed in the zoo to hunt, isn't it? You have to understand how dependent people were. 99% of humans didn't even plant a single seed during their lifetime. Not to talk about utilizing energy and water. The economists weren't ready for this extreme change. A large percent of the population who lacked those skills and knowledge had no other way to survive except stealing, robbing, and sometimes even killing. So, being forced out of their captivity, people faced 2 major options. First was to steal and kill, and the second was to try to organize a new system that would take care of them again. Edward Black's society was the biggest one of that sort. He formed a society that took care of its members with an economic system and police. It was well organized, and many people joined it and filled their role in that society. But besides those societies and bandits, there was another kind of people who survived in a different way. They were called loners, as they weren't associated with any society and they weren't thieves. Nate Haitley was one of them. He was an electrical engineer who was living off-grid long before the hard years. His hobby was traveling and discovering methods of sustainable living around the globe. He taught many off-gridders new and creative ways of self-sustaining. When the heat wave struck, Nate and his family were more than capable of surviving it. In the first 2 years, he developed and explored new methods of artificial lighting and underground crop raising. He started passing on this knowledge to other loners. He knew that in order to pass the knowledge to other humans, a new World Wide Web must be established. Nate used his engineering skills to fix and rehabilitate the communication infrastructures in his area. He called it the New Web. Other loners were starting to connect again, and Nate spread not only survival knowledge, but how to connect to the web knowledge.
Is it looking good? Okay. Hello there. This is me, Nate, my first video being posted on the New Web. I have no idea how many of you are connected or online right now, but whoever and wherever you are, today we are going to learn together how to help more people connect to our web. I can't hide my excitement, but because our bandwidth is limited and unstable, let us get practical. So,
2 years after the heat waves erupted, traveling became relatively safe again. This helped Nate and other loners to spread the new web further until most humans were connected to each other. People could communicate again in large numbers. Everyone started to learn about the new kinds of living that evolved since the heat waves began. It was the first time that communication between humans did not involve capital. This knowledge gave people the opportunity to become totally independent. But not everyone implemented this knowledge, for they still preferred living in a society that took care of them. Many people still preferred feeling protected by the system. But the seed of independence was planted. 3 years later, the sun entered a period without sunspots, and the atmosphere cooled down. There were also major eruptions of volcanoes in Indonesia and Iceland that emitted sulfur dioxide into the air, which reflected sunlight away from the earth. The climate improved, but everyone knew that heat waves could erupt again at any moment. It was the time for people to choose. It was the time to choose a leader for the coming years. Many people felt the urge to return everything to normal, and normal meant to recreate an administration that would take care of their needs. Edward Black, whose community became very large at the time, called all other communities and loners to join together. He stated that as long as humans will be united and act as a collective that takes care of people's needs, it will make them strong again, and this will ensure their safety as it did over the past 5 years. Nate Haley suggested something else.
after proving ourselves to be capable of independence, are we going again to place ourselves in the embrace of a big system? Are we going to condemn ourselves to become a small component again? How many times do we need to see big, complex mechanisms collapse before we understand that being dependent on them is not a great idea? How many times do we need to witness the consequences of being governed on our lives, on our environment? Mr. Black puts society before its members. I say society doesn't need to be put anywhere. Society must grow and evolve from a basis of already fulfilled and secure individuals. But why do we possess this need for a system in the first place? Why are some of us still prone to be governed or subordinated? Do we have a natural inclination to be dependent on something greater than us?
When the people chose Nate, his first and most urgent goal was to provide each and every family with a piece of land. He knew that once people had their land without ever being afraid of that land being taken away from them, they would feel safe to build a life on that land, not only a house, but a whole living and breathing ecosystem. He never said it's going to be easy. He never claimed that becoming independent would be effortless. On the contrary, no more shortcuts. He always said, today we confront life directly.
Don't we deserve the chance to find out our true nature? You see, these questions about human inclinations and capabilities stem from fear. Fear that we might fail. Fear that we are incapable of taking care of ourselves. Fear that once we are released from our leash, chaos will reign. Is that indeed the case? Remove judgment, remove fear. Transcend the concept of equality, and a new collective will be established freely and naturally.
People all over the world started to build their own houses, mostly from natural materials and without permission of any kind from the authorities. For the authorities wanted most of all freedom for their people. Guidance and teaching was constantly offered by the administration, but it was always suggested, never forced. Some people did it by themselves, others did it together. We have a question for Mark. But how did they decide who's going to get which land? Weren't people fighting for the better lands? That's a very good point, Mark. This was exactly why people chose Nate as their leader. His job was to guide and find land for people. Many people were already independent at the time and had their own piece of land. For those who didn't, Nate's administration got people's requests and preferences and chose lands for them. Yes, some people protested and many were unhappy about their given land. But gradually the freedom and independence that this new kind of living enabled became far more meaningful than the specific view they had or the proximity they had to a source of water, for example. Nate helped them to get along with what they had. It took time, but people learned and became more and more independent, more and more connected to their surroundings. Without any dependence on money, people started to work for the collective. Not everyone went to work. Some preferred their free time on their own land or traveling. This created a situation in which people who did work did it only because they wanted to, and only because they were eager to do so. You must understand, today this is the only way we know, doing the job we like. But before the hard years, that wasn't the case. Everyone was dependent on money, on the system, on ideologies. Becoming independent allowed them to cooperate in big projects not based on monetary incentives, but rather because they truly wanted those projects to happen.
There are two ways to do things collectively in our new reality. The first is with the help of the leadership, whose job will be to connect people with similar interests and desires. The second way is for people themselves to organize for mutual goals. If one wants to start a new project, you have to communicate and convince other people to work with him on this project. In this reality, the members decide and carry out their decisions. We govern ourselves, and this is more powerful than any administration.
Today our collective is working on a project of stopping the distancing of the moon from the Earth. The moon with its proximity is like an anchor that is keeping the Earth from wobbling off its axis. If the moon will get too distant from us, it will cause the Earth's axis to shift dramatically and will cause impossible seasons of cold and heat that will destroy most life on Earth. If we were to live in the capitalistic era, we would have been considered insane just for trying to think of solving this problem. Think of a leader at that time whose most important measure for success is his country's domestic product growth. What are his chances in convincing the people that the next smart move is wasting huge amounts of money on moving an asteroid with the right mass to a point in space that will balance between the Earth's gravity and the moon's gravity? Capitalistically speaking, a leader with that kind of an idea would be considered insane. Their first question to him would be, how much interest can you give us back? So you rightfully ask, how come today the leadership doesn't need to convince anyone in order to have this project succeed? I see some answers here. Because money is no longer an issue. Oh, but money is an issue, but it is not the issue. We all know what the issue is nowadays. People's true wishes. People's survival. Peace upon you. Until next time.